Does this happen to you often? You're sitting in class or at work trying to focus, and suddenly your mind drifts off into a completely different world. And before you know it, minutes or even hours have passed. People around you might jump to conclusions and think you're just slacking off, but the truth could be something entirely different. You might actually be dealing with maladaptive daydreaming. So, what is maladaptive daydreaming? Clinical psychologist Eli Sommer coined this term to describe a behavior in which intense, vivid, and excessive daydreams take over your thoughts. These daydreams become highly distracting and make you unable to focus on things going on around you. This condition often happens as a way to cope with stress, negative emotions, or traumatic events. Some researchers also relate it to an inattentive type of ADHD. In one study, around 20% of those diagnosed with ADHD showed signs of maladaptive daydreaming. On the surface, this might look like laziness or procrastination, but remember, it's not. Today, we want to talk about the differences between maladaptive daydreaming and slacking off. It can be hurtful to just assume it's laziness, so let's clear up some misconceptions and dive deeper into what's really going on. It's not just boredom. When slacking off, many of us daydream to pass the time or escape boredom, like during a slow class, a boring meeting, or a long commute. But for someone with maladaptive daydreaming, it's not about boredom. It's about coping with trauma and overwhelming emotions. When life feels overwhelming or unresolved emotions bubble up, daydreaming becomes your safe space, a way to handle intense emotions. For many, these daydreams start in childhood, often as a way to escape overwhelming emotions or trauma. Have you ever wished the world in your head could replace reality? In these fantasies, you might imagine being loved in ways you've never felt, or even rescued from a situation you can't escape in real life. You might have comforting, healing conversations with an imaginary therapist. These vivid daydreams provide temporary relief, but the longer you stay in them, the harder it becomes to return to the real world. A movie scene. Slacking off is usually about something simple, like scrolling TikTok or playing a game, passive activities that don't take much mental effort. But maladaptive daydreaming is an entirely different world. You're not just zoning out, you're creating entire worlds with detailed plots and characters and storylines. Like a movie you can't stop watching. Sometimes music and pictures of certain words can trigger these elaborate fantasies. You create a whole new life, a new personality, a bunch of imaginary friends, or a dream partner who always gets you. Sometimes you might fantasize about being a hero who saves the day. You might even find yourself smiling, pacing, or gesturing while you're caught up in your fantasies. It's also not uncommon to zone out during conversations, missing what people are saying entirely. Has this ever happened to you? If so, you're probably familiar with the guilt and embarrassment that follows once you've snapped out of it and realize how much time you've lost. But still, these fantasies can feel so vivid and fulfilling that they seem better than real life. Real life actually starts to seem pretty dull in comparison. Can't snap out of it. When you're procrastinating, there's a level of control. You might think, just 5 more minutes, but eventually you can snap out of it and get back to work. Maybe a looming deadline gets you focused again, or you just push yourself to refocus. But maladaptive daydreaming doesn't give you that choice. One moment you're present, and then the next, you're lost in a daydream so intense it feels like your brain hit the off switch without warning. And often, you don't realize how much time has passed. Some people with maladaptive daydreaming spend more than half their day in these daydreams. That's why this condition is even being considered a behavioral addiction. And we all know that addictions aren't something that's easily manageable. It simply takes over, leaving you feeling disconnected and out of control, taking a toll. Slacking off might make you miss a deadline or leave you cramming for an assignment, but it's Usually no big deal, but maladaptive daydreaming can take a real psychological toll. It doesn't just steal your time, it can steal your peace of mind. Being lost in your fantasies can start to affect your relationships, work, or school, because the real world starts to feel less important. These daydreams can become obsessive, much like repetitive thoughts in OCD. They start to replay in your mind on a loop, making it hard to focus on anything else. Over time, this can lead to dissociation and make you feel disconnected from the present moment. You may also experience negative emotions and psychological distress. You might feel frustrated that you can't focus on what's going on around you, anxious and guilty about neglecting real-world tasks, or even ashamed of this habit. And the hardest part is feeling like you can't talk about it. Do you feel like you wouldn't be understood if you shared this with someone? Or that people would look at you weirdly? This is when this condition gets incredibly lonely and isolating. How to deal? If this is starting to sound familiar, try not to worry. There are ways to take back control. Start by figuring out what triggers your daydreams. Is it stress, certain emotions? Keeping track of these triggers in a journal can help you spot patterns. You can try mindfulness meditation to ground you in the present moment. Cognitive strategies like reframing your thoughts can also make a huge difference. For example, you can say to yourself, I can recognize that I'm daydreaming. This feels comfortable, but I need to focus on other things now and return to my fantasy later. It may seem really hard, but it's not about stopping daydreams entirely. It's about finding healthier ways to process emotions and stay connected to the world around you. And if this gets overwhelming and starts to affect your daily life, you can always talk to a mental health professional who can guide you towards recovery. And it might take time, but you're not alone in this. And with the right tools, it's possible to find balance. So do you relate to any of these signs? We'd love to hear your experiences. If you're still unsure, take a look at our previous videos on maladaptive daydreaming. We'd like you to remember that even though people may judge you and say you're slacking off, it's not your fault and you're not being lazy. So keep your chin up, thanks for watching, and take care out there.